Okay, class, we started on section 6.6, solving quadratic equations by factoring. A quadratic equation has blank as its highest exponent. It has 2 as its highest exponent. The standard form of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Example, we could have 2x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 0. That's an example of a quadratic equation. It says in this section we are going to learn our first technique for solving quadratic equations. But first we need the zero product principle to help us. Given the equation blank times blank equals 0. So that means anything we put here times 0 is 0. And then also if it's 0 times anything else is also 0. Can you tell me something about what goes in those boxes? Basically, 0 has to go in one of the boxes, and in the other box, anything else. If a and b are real numbers, and if ab equals 0, then a is equal to 0, or b is equal to 0. That is, if the product of two numbers is 0, then at least one of the numbers must be 0. One number must be 0, but both could be 0. So A and B could be 0. Okay, now it says solve. Now, all this means is we need to make at least one of these parentheses equal 0 to make this whole equation equal 0. So what we would do is let's set both of these parentheses equal to 0. So we will have, first we will have x minus 3 equals 0. And then we will have x plus 5 equals 0. Now we could drop the parentheses. We have x minus 3 equals 0. We add 3 on both sides, and x is 3. Over here, we drop the parentheses, and we'll subtract 5 on both sides, and x is equal to negative 5. So your answer here is x is 3, comma, negative 5. That means x could be 3 or negative 5, and that will make this whole problem 0. So we add 3 for x here. 3 minus 3 is 0. 3 plus 5 is 8. 0 times 8 is 0. Or if we put in negative 5 for x, negative 5 minus 3 is a negative 8, and negative 5 plus 5 is 0. Negative 8 times 0 is 0. So it works. Now we scroll to the next page. It says objective 2, solve quadratic equations by factoring. Now basically, I'm not going to read through all of this. Basically what we're going to do the regular factoring that we did before. We're going to act like this equation, that this equation is not equal to 0. We're just going to deal with this expression here. So let's do that first. So we cannot factor out anything here. So we'll write our A, B, and C. A is 1, B is negative 7, and C is 10. Now we multiply our A and C, which will give us 10, because you know 1 times 10 is 10. So we do the factors of 10. We add 1 and 10, and we add 2 and 5. Now, if you notice here, your B is negative, but your A and C is positive. So that means that both of these numbers has to be negative. So we add negative 2 and negative 5. We know that gives us negative 7. So we will have x squared minus 2x minus 5x plus 10. And we don't have to put the equal 0 now. So we group the first two values. We can factor out an x, and we have x minus 2. We group the second two values here, and we know whatever we factor out has to be negative because the first term is negative. So we factor out a negative 5, and we're left with x minus 2. So we will have x minus 5 times x minus 2, and this time we bring down the equal 0. Now what we did in the first example on this in this exercise, now to finish this problem off, we have to set both of these parentheses equal to 0. Now we don't have to write the parentheses. We can just take x minus 5 equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. Now we solve for x. We add 5 on both sides. X is equal to 5. We add 2 on both sides, and x equals 2. So our final answer here would be x is equal to 2 comma 5. That is our final answer. Now, again, if we substitute in 2 or 5, that would give our equation to equal 0. Now, one thing that I did not say that I'm going to say right now is when you're dealing with these equations, they must equal 0. If they don't equal 0 before you do any factoring or anything else, you must make the equations equal 0. Now we look here at B. We have x squared minus x equals 0. Now, what we have here, we could factor out an x, and we would be left with x minus 1, and that's all equal to 0. Now, there's nothing more we could do with this. So we would set x equals 0, and we would set x minus 1 equals 0. Now, x equals 0 is done. Now, x minus 1 equals 0, we have to add 1 to both sides, and x equals 1. So our final answer is x equals 0 comma 1. And that's it. Now we scroll down here to C. Now with C, if you notice here, this is not set equal to 0. So the first thing we have to do is make sure this is equal to 0. And we would do that by adding 24 to both sides of the equation. And there's that 4 acting up again. All right, let's see. So it'd be 24 on both sides of the equation. So we would have x squared minus 14x plus 24 equals 0. Now, on this side of the equation, we have nothing in common, so we list our a, b, and c. A is 1, b is negative 14, and c is 24. So now we multiply our a and c. We know that will give us 24. I think this 4 is acting up again. All right. So now we have a and c is 24. So now we take the factors of 24, which would be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. Now, since a and c is positive and b is negative, that means that all of these values will be negative. So you can mark that on your paper, but the two values that we will end up concentrating on is the negative 2 and the negative 12. So that'll be negative 14. So now we substitute. We have x squared minus 2x minus 12x plus 24 is equal to 0. Now we group the first two terms. We can factor out an x, and that will give us x minus 2. We group the second two terms here. We can factor out a negative 12, and we will have x minus 2. And we can put our equal 0. So we will have x minus 12 times x minus 2, and that equals 0. So we'll take x minus 12 equals 0, and x minus 2 equals 0. So you add 12 on both sides, and x equals 12. You add 2 on both sides, and x is equal to 2. So we know our final answer here would be x equals 2, comma 12. And that's the final answer here. Okay, now we go here to D. Now, we have to make this equal 0, so we will subtract 8 on both sides. So we have 18x squared minus 8 equals 0. Now, with 18x squared minus 8, they both have 2 in common. So we'll factor out 2, and we have 9x squared minus 4 equals 0. Now, in this parenthesis here, we have the difference of 2 squares. So we'll write down our 2. We'll do our 2 parentheses equals 0. So this will give us 3x in both parentheses. And we know we have to do a plus in one and a minus in the other parenthesis. And we know that'll be a 2 in both of those parentheses. So we add 2 times the parenthesis 3x plus 2 times 3x minus 2. Now, since this 2 on the outside that we factor doesn't have an x, we do not set that equal to 0. In order for us to set the value we factored out equal to 0, it must have a variable connected to it. So all we would do is set both of these parentheses equal to 0. And then we will solve. You subtract 2 on both sides. 3x equals negative 2. Divide each side by 3. And x is a negative 2/3. Here we're going to add 2 on both sides. So we add 3x equals 2. Divide each side by 3. And x is a positive 2/3. So we know our final answer would be x is negative 2/3, comma positive 2/3. And that is the final answer. Okay. Now we scroll down here to the next page. Now we're at example 2. Now if you notice, this equation is not equal to 0, so we're going to have to subtract 30w and minus 80 on both sides. On both sides of the equation. So we will have 5w squared minus 30w minus 8 equals 0. Okay, now one other thing that I didn't tell you is this here. The a value with this 5w squared cannot be negative. That's why we moved the 30w and the 80 to the opposite side. Oh, it's supposed to be 80, not 8. Okay, so that should be 80. Okay, now 5w squared, 30w, and 80. Okay, now we can factor out a 5. And we will be left with w squared minus 6w minus 16 equals 0. Now, we could go off to the side here and list our a, b, and c. A is 1, b is negative 6, and c is negative 16. Now, when we multiply our a and c, we know our a times c would give us negative 16. Now we want to do the factors of 16. I could list them here. Well, it'd be factors of negative 16. It'd be 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. Now, since when we multiplied our a and c is negative and our b is negative, that means that the larger numbers here would be negative. So we want our b to equal negative 6. We know 2 and negative 8 would give us negative 6. So we will have w squared plus 2w minus 8w minus 16. Now we group these first two terms. We'll factor out w, and we add w plus 2. We group the second two terms. We can factor out a negative 8, and we will add w plus 2. Now, in one parenthesis, we add w minus 8. In the other parenthesis, we add w plus 2. We'll bring down our 5, and we'll bring down our equal 0. Now, we know we will set both of these parentheses equal to 0. Because this 5 doesn't have a variable with it, so we don't set that equal to 0. It'll be w minus 8 equals 0, and w plus 2 equals 0. We'll add 8 on both sides. So w is equal to 8. We'll subtract 2 on both sides, and w equals negative 2. So we know our final answer is w is equal to negative 2 comma 8. Now we go here. We need to move this 12x over here with this 9x squared plus 4. So we'll subtract 12x on both sides. So we add 9x squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0. Now, we have nothing in common here, and we will list our a, b, and c. Now, our a here is 9, our b is negative 12, and our c is 4. Now, a times c, we know would give us 36. So we do the factors of 36, which is 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. Now, since our A and C is positive, but our B is negative, that means that both of our values have to be negative. And the two that will work is the 6.